Thank you for joining us today. This program is Look Before You Speak, and it takes a unique approach to looking at and talking about art. In our time today, we have most contemporary television has conditioned us to look and absorb images between 1 and 2 seconds. 2 seconds is a long time to look at something. And this conditioning has really, I believe, impeded a lot of the ways in which we do look at and absorb art and talk about art. So this program attempts to address that. Today we have a very special guest. We have Lisa Simon, who is the co-owner of Radius Gallery here in Missoula. And Lisa and Jason Neal have been operating the gallery for almost a year and a half.
It's almost 2.
Almost 2 years. And they've presented and celebrated contemporary artists in the region. And also the gallery is just not commercial, but just has a real commitment to educating people about contemporary voices, contemporary movements, and contemporary ideas in Missoula and the region. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, and you brought some images, and
I did.
This is really interesting because you have kind of, upon this invitation, you kind of taken a little bit different approach in talking about some isms, maybe a historical foundation for some of the artists that you represent and show.
Yeah, and I did that because I wanted to give people a link into the conversations about art that have been going on for a long time. So first of all, the main thing that you need to look at art is curiosity. And you don't need an ism to look at art and have something to say about it, or you just need to ask it questions. But there have been conversations going on about art for a long time, and they, after a while, after they've formed their little group of ideas, they get a label slapped on them. And that's what a lot of these isms are. And I'm just going to go over 4 of them because it gives people something else to look for when they're looking at art.
That's great.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, well, let's look at the first image you brought.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start with realism because realism is the most accessible and it's very old. But realism has its limits, and a lot of people are immediately drawn to realism. So realism has this 3-point perspective, and you can see I chose this image, and I just got this off the interweb, but I chose it because it still had the lines in it.
And do you know who the artist is?
No, I don't know who the artist is. I just looked for one that had the lines still in it.
Sure.
So
this predates photography and
yes.
Yeah, the concept of
The
1, 2,
concept.
3-point perspectives.
Yes, and you see those perspectives and how all the windows are lined up with those little graphic lines that are that fade out into the horizon. And from, I think, Renaissance forward, this has been the dominant. Is that true?
Well, it's really created a foundation for a lot of academic art, for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're absolutely right. I think popular culture has really embraced realism because I think in some ways when you think of art as a language, it's the most accessible language. So that's great.
But realism can be kind of cold because it is just a representation. And with the advent of photography in the 1800s, it became, then there were different questions about why do I want to represent something if I can just take a picture of it?
Yeah, sure.
So then realism, the boundaries of realism start getting pushed. And so one of those ways that it gets pushed is through hyperrealism. So that's the next image.
Oh, let's put up the next image.
Of the palm. And this is a painting by Barb Schwartz, so a local Missoula painter. And she's painting here, so it's a palm. You recognize what it is, and it's pretty impressive. When people do realism, usually there's a lot of awe in it, because it focuses on the sort of raw talent.
Oh, look at the detail on this. It's
Yeah.
great.
So hyperrealism lets you geek out on how talented the artist is. Like, wow, she really captured that, didn't she?
I think it's interesting with some of these isms is that I think maybe artists, when they have this instinct to create, you know, they don't wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to create some realism or impressionism or whatever.
No.
But it's choosing a language, and the language becomes natural, and whatever the ism is kind of comes later as a way to talk about these things.
Absolutely. The critic or the person having the conversation is always
Historian or
is always behind the artist. We're just trying to figure out what they're doing.
yeah.
And by grouping them in these ways helps us understand what they're doing a little more.
Yeah, there's a difference between English and Latin.
No, but you're right about the artist. The
Yeah.
artist isn't intending to be like, I want to join this school today.
Right.
In fact, sometimes when we ask, like we just had a show at Radius on surrealism. Well, you were part of it. And we, asking people to do surrealist work, if that's not in their wheelhouse, they don't want, it's hard for them to just work toward a movement. I mean, it's something in them that's speaking toward an experience, and then the historian or person talking about it adds the label. But they are useful labels.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention one other thing about Barb is, and I know Barb is an artist, and just her background as an educator for years and years, so she has a clear understanding of what is happening and all of these things. So, and that's a wonderful painting.
Yeah.
So what's the scale on that?
It's a large painting. It's probably 4 feet tall.
Wow.
Yeah, and so those details are really heightened.
Yeah.
So
well, let's look at another image here.
So one of the things that hyperrealism does is let you appreciate, in this case, naturalistic detail. So Audubon and those kind of.
And one thing I would also wanted to add about it is, like it's alive and well.
Yeah. Another artist in Missoula who's working in hyperrealism is Andy Klein.
Yeah.
I love those paintings that he does. Okay, do you want to look at the new one?
Yeah, next
All right.
image. Oh,
So
wow.
this is called Marsh by Bobby McKibben, who is a artist from the Bitterroot. Her work is also in the Smithsonian, so she's one of our most celebrated artists in this area. So you look at this, and it's called Marsh, and you're there. It's a very accessible painting, and it's a long painting. Maybe.
What's the scale on this?
Oh, this one's 5 feet by 3 feet.
And this is a painting and not a pastel.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a drawing, a pastel drawing.
It's a pastel. Okay.
And this perspective of it is skewing it a little. It's a really long rectangle. And that rectangle is often very peaceful. So when you're doing a landscape, in fact, the vertical landscape is called, the vertical positioning of a painting is called a landscape view because it is so peaceful. So in the larger scale, you see this peaceful marsh, and it's very realistic. But if you get down to the details, so if you look at, this is the bottom left corner of it, you see that it's not realistic, not like Barb's was, where the closer you go, the more detail you get. This, the closer you go, the more abstract markings
Yeah.
you see. And so she's using mark making, the emphasis of like hitting the canvas hard with your pen to create an energy. And that gives this what would be a peaceful landscape. Well, this is realism, but it's moving into expressionism because that wildness around the edges, the mark making, comes from inside the artist. So the artist is not just portraying the scene, but expressing their idea of the scene.
Yeah,
And,
well, sure comes out there.
We're going to see that in contrast to the next one. But
Okay.
look at those marks
Yeah,
on
it's
there.
great.
Can you pull out any more to see how rectangular it is?
You mean draw out on it and
Yeah.
see how horizontal it is?
Yeah. Because this is making a square of it. No?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll see what we can do here.
All right. Okay, so that is what I would call realism moving into expressionism.
Okay. Okay.
So the next one is a painting by Louise Lamagne.
Wow. I think that both of these examples, both Bobby and Louise, really, these are artists that really understand the colors they're using and celebrate their understanding of light on the land. And I think Louise is a little more experimental.
Yes. So in this one, we're still working in realism because you recognize the things in it. There's a river and mountains and trees. So anytime you can do that, you're in realism. But what makes it expressive is mountains don't really look like that, and they're not. She's making choices that take her outside the realm of realism. So that the color of blue, the pink in there, those aren't colors that are true to an external reality. They're true to an internal reality.
That's a great point.
True to her feeling about this landscape. And what Louise is known for is not just these really vibrant colors that move outside of realism, but also those languid brush strokes. You see that smooth line that just melds one into another. That is also expressive.
Yeah.
It's expressive of a calmness. And so what is Louise expressing here, you might ask yourself? It's not conflict like Bobby's. It's not wildness or danger. It's actually the opposite. It feels very calm to look at this. And where in Bobby's drawing there was a tension between the calmness in the center and the wildness on the outside, this is all calmness. There's very little tension in this painting. If there is any tension, it's between the vibrancy of those colors.
Well, and I think the other thing that she's saying to us in this piece is, look at this time. Like the sun is hitting the earth in a way that it's changing the color of the earth. And look at how beautiful this is. And so, in a subtle way, she's celebrating that, the moment.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. And that's, if I was going to bring in another ism, it would have been Impressionism, which is all about capturing time.
Sure.
A set of time, a moment in time.
Okay. And we have another image?
We have more images.
Okay, great.
So this painting is by Meegan More. It's also a local painter. the ism that that I'm associating with this is symbolism. But again, the first thing when you approach this painting, you know you're in realism. And you know you're in realism because you recognize that there's a woman. And perhaps you recognize on the left that there's a tree there, a tree trunk. But mostly that there is a woman tells you you're in realism. But something is off. This isn't strict realism. If we can see the full picture again, you see that that dress is not quite a dress. It's a graphical element. And then there is this plane of just green across the front. And the gold leaf tree, her foot is stuck inside it. So you just get the sense that there's something else going on here.
Yeah.
And when the story that it's telling is not apparent in realism, then you can sort of start asking what else it's doing. And then that's where another ism comes in. In this case, it's symbolism. And, you know, symbolism is probably one of the oldest forms.
Yeah.
Long before the title existed, people were painting things that had cultural associations. So, and religious paintings are often symbolic. So a dove is not just a dove, not a realistic bird,
Yeah.
but it is it's the sign of peace.
Yeah.
So,
It's a metaphor.
yeah.
And I think one of the things I enjoy about that painting is the manipulation of the construct to lead your eye. You know, there's this plane, but, I mean, is she under a table? She isn't under a table. This
No.
is from the mind's eye. You can obviously deduct that it's not a table. It's a compositional element. And so the artist is saying, this is my choice. And the artist is saying that kind of in your face. And no, that's really a great example.
And the title is going to help you here too, because the title is Hecate Joins the Search for Persephone. So that is an allusion to a Greek myth.
Right.
And in the Greek myth, it's a mother-daughter story where Demeter loses her daughter Persephone. Nobody will help her. Nobody will go against Zeus, who has taken her daughter, arranged for her daughter to be taken to Hades. So the realistic paintings of the point where Hecate joins the search and helps this other woman find her daughter, that's usually portrayed of these two women with lanterns, like going out to seek Persephone.
Sure.
So that Meegan has chosen this moment where it's a woman lying down and the search for Persephone, the search for the daughter, is inward.
Yeah. And the use of a tree. Is the tree growing? Is the tree dying? What is the tree doing there? So you have all of those questions.
Yeah,
as well.
and I mean, you can just think of in our culture how many associations there are with tree.
Sure.
And biblical tree of knowledge.
Yeah.
If you know Greek myth, it's the entrance to the underworld is through an oak tree. So that her foot is in a tree is sort of, her foot is in the entrance to the underworld.
Wow.
There's a lot going on here.
Yeah, yeah.
And the grid of her dress sort of echoes the grid of what she's lying on. And then there's a third grid off to the left. And these things sort of suggest space, some kind of spatial grid. And that might suggest that we're not in realism too. Like we're
Sure.
outside of
Sure.
the world. Once you get the background of some of this story, once you see that you're in the world of symbolism from these other things, and that this journey is an inward journey. I read, and this is just a reading because it's not like these come with crib notes.
Sure.
I read that as the veil of consciousness. She's going unconscious to find her daughter, to find a daughter. And then this takes you into a very universal reading of searching for children, searching for, that's such a recurring theme in literature and painting, is the search for the son or the daughter. So
That's great. I really like that you acknowledge that this is your reading, because that's one thing I like about all these paintings is the artist does the work and allows the artist to read them.
Yeah.
And bring their own background and education, and it's okay if you come up with a different reading of something.
In fact, you probably will.
Yeah.
And the intention of the artist, once they hang it on the wall, that's it. Now it's my reading.
Yeah.
So they
right.
can intend all they want, but there's a limit to what their intentions can do.
Well, this is a wonderful thing about what you guys are doing, because the arts cannot function in a vacuum, and artists, as much as they like working alone in their studio and all that stuff, they really need audience in order to complete have meaning. If they don't have audience and they don't have interaction or the support from a community, it's one hand clapping.
Yeah.
It's not working. And so anyway, I really appreciate that what you guys are doing as far as creating a foundation for people to look at, appreciate. Yes, they can purchase things and take them home, but it's really about community, and you guys are doing some great work with that.
And it's about conversation. I mean, our tagline there is live with art. We think that the ideas that artists are bringing up are ones that you ought to live with, that you ought to have in your house.
Sure.
And
celebrating, art isn't just something 100 years ago, or it's not something that's in New York and Los Angeles.
Yes.
But it's something that is here, and it's in our community, and it's everywhere. And we need to learn ways to look at and talk about work.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think the conversation, I mean, what you were saying about the artist, can be isolated by themselves, but how they join the community is really to have people talk about their work. And I really loathe going into a gallery and the only conversation that I can participate in is money conversation. Like, I'm not there to talk about the money.
Yeah.
And I run into that sometimes, and it irritates me.
Yeah. Did you bring another image?
I think I did.
Okay, excellent. Is this it? Oh, man. This is great. Okay.
So this is Courtney Blazon, another Missoula artist. And this is the ism associated with this one is surrealism. Now, surrealism was a movement in the 1920s, but it pre-existed. What surrealism means before it got its title is just to go into the imagination or to enhance realism with the imagination. So things that cannot exist in nature can exist in surrealism. And surrealism is especially associated with the truth of dreams and the dream world. So you know how when you're having a dream, you just see weird stuff, but you don't really question it. You sort of just accept and sometimes even enjoy that weirdness. And that's part of the human experience. So in Courtney's here, this is called Pigs and Whistle, and it's a take on the three pigs, which you see in this little house. And the wolf that is coming to the door is holding a manifestation of their house burning down. and there's a huge tongue coming out of its stomach. And there are little fellows that look menacing on top of that tongue. And in each floor of the house, there is an odd, strange little metaphor. And or something's going on. It's weird.
It's based in realism. There's something real. And what are
Yeah.
the elements that are real? Well, you have all the elements are real, but putting them together
Yeah.
makes them dreamlike.
Yes.
And, you know,
Beets exist, but they don't have little faces.
right, right. And there are little faces, but
this-
they aren't on beats.
And there's an example with this one in talking to Courtney. You know, her feeling about it was this woman had to be really large. She had to be in the foreground, and for some reason she had to have a whistle. And I was talking to her. I'm like, well, what's that whistle about? And she's like, I don't know, but there's all this sort of bad stuff going on in this painting. And I said, is it a whistleblower? And she's like, that's it. So, I mean, this is really, it really operates like your dreams,
Yeah.
where the painter here, Courtney, wasn't actually sure of why it needed to come together until she started having a conversation about
Yeah.
it. So sometimes artists put things down that they're not even sure, they just feel compelled to do it, but it hasn't reached
Yeah.
the level of language.
Yeah. Well, I hate to say this, but we're just about out of time.
Really?
Yeah, I know. And I just,
fast.
all of these artists, the story is so important to them.
Yeah.
And like that concept of them being alone, I just think the work that you and Jason are doing with the gallery and helping artists connect with community and is so great.
Oh, thank
and
you.
thank you for coming on and
My
talking
pleasure.
about some things that you're passionate about. So, and if people do get a chance, please check out the Radius Gallery and check out these artists. You can go see the real work and not just see them on Look Before You Speak. Thanks for tuning in today.